Here we go. Let me make sure we're recording here. All right. So welcome everybody to the Stress Food Connection. I am Judy England, as you know. I'm the health education coordinator for the NORC, a nurse, and my focus has always been on the mind-body connection. I'm fascinated with this over the years, scientific background, and also because of an illness I had in my 30s that left me with some chronic health problems that I was trying to manage. So stress is particularly important on how it affects every system in the body and the workings of our mind. So I think that if we begin to understand how stress works in the mind, in the body, we become empowered. Knowledge is powerful, and we become empowered to make better choices about our health. So I always like to start by saying that when I talk about stress, I talk about stress management. I don't talk about stress reduction, because there's no way I can wave a magic wand and make all the stresses in your life go away. But what I can do is share some tools that hopefully you can apply in your own life. So what are we actually going to be looking at today during this time we have together? This is an overview. We're going to develop an understanding of the effects of stress on the mind and the body. A lot of this you've been over before, but it never hurts to review it and to deepen your understanding. And we're going to zero in specifically on how stress affects food choices and eating behavior. And I know your minds are all working about perhaps how your eating behavior has changed during COVID-19. We're going to discuss mindfulness practices and how we can use those to help manage eating challenges. And finally, we're going to actually have an experience of practicing mindful eating. So if you don't have that small piece of food handy, please take a moment to go and get that. So the big question, why do we eat? In the simplest terms, we eat because we're hungry. Well, what does that mean? That means that our brain has gotten the signal from our bodies that the blood sugar level has dropped too low and we need to take in some fuel. It signals the brain to stimulate hunger. But you know, and I know that we eat for a whole host of other reasons. We eat for companionship. We eat for celebrations. We eat for variety and excitement. I remember reading about the buffet phenomenon, that people, when they go to a buffet, whether it's at a party or if everybody could just put themselves on mute, who's not speaking, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. How we tend to eat more when we are at a buffet because of the variety of foods that are available. It's very attractive to us. And then we also eat for comfort and we eat for boredom. I don't know what to do, so I'm going to grab that bag of potato chips or that carton of Ben and Jerry's. I laughed too because my son was joking with me and he said, you know how they talk about when someone goes away to college and they pack on the freshman 15. Well, we can look at the COVID-19 and actually the statistics that I read said that the average person in the United States gained 30 pounds during the last year. That's incredible. So on an average, that's about 2 pounds a month. So very, very significant weight gain. So we know that eating is not just a simple process. We're complicated creatures and we have all kinds of reasons that we like to eat. So keep that in mind and let's look at the stress response. So in the beginnings of the stress response, we get a stimuli from one or more of our senses. We see something, we hear something. But I'd like to point out that sometimes the stressor doesn't arise outside of ourselves. It arises in our own minds, in the way we perceive a situation. So that slide is not 100% correct. So on to stage 2, the body interprets the signal, whether it's external or internal, as a threat or a non-threat. And if we determine that it's a threat, the body shifts into high gear. The sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, and that prompts the cascade of different hormones into the body to prepare us for flight or fight. That would be adrenaline, epinephrine, cortisol, and 2 other hormones, oxytocin and DHEA, which we'll speak a little bit about later. So hopefully over time, the threat is removed and the body returns to homeostasis via the parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. So that's how it works. So what are the key points that we have to keep in mind when we look at stress and how it affects our body and our mind? Well, first and foremost, we have only one biological response to stress, and it doesn't matter what the stressor is, whether it's external, whether it's internal, whether it's in our minds, or actually out there in the real world. We have only one response. Stress can arise in the body and affect the mind, or the other way around, it can arise in the mind and affect the body. In the first instance, think about a time when you weren't feeling well. Maybe you had a cold, or you didn't sleep well, or you had an injury, and your mind was affected by the stress of that situation. Maybe you didn't think so clearly. Maybe you became more anxious or worried, or maybe you had some other physical symptoms of stress. And the stress that can affect the mind, arise in the mind and affect the body. Think of a time when you were worried or anxious about something, and all those little physical symptoms that cropped up. Maybe you got a headache, or you suffered from indigestion, or you broke out in a rash. All of those things that are linked with stress. Stress affects every single system in the body. And the body prioritizes. Once that sympathetic nervous system is triggered, once those hormones start to be produced, the body begins to prioritize what are the important systems in our body, what do we need to preserve, and what can kind of go on hold for a little while. The systems that might speed up would be your heart rate, your breathing, the amount of blood that's flowing to your muscles so you can fight that threat or run away. But as we'll talk about in more detail, the body does not prioritize your digestive system. Think about it. In a situation of real stress, what is really important is not sitting down and having a meal. It's preserving your life and your well-being. So that system slows down. The stress response is hardwired into us for survival. And that's a good thing, because it keeps us safe and it keeps us alive. It keeps us alert for potential threats. And we need to learn to activate the relaxation response so that we can manage our stress, that parasympathetic nervous system. We all know how to go from 0 to 60 in no time at all, but to reverse that and to slow down and return the body to a state of calm very often takes practice. So what are some definitions of stress? Well, this is a good one. It's a total body response, physical, mental, emotional, to a real or imagined threat. And again, I want to underline that imagined threat. Just think about a time when you've been to a movie and the movie perhaps had an upsetting scene in it, and you could feel perhaps your stomach getting tight, your muscles getting tight, activating the stress response just by watching the movie, even though it wasn't happening to you, or a bad dream that you had where you were under threat. So it doesn't matter whether it's a real threat or something in your own mind. But I like this other definition. Stress is what arises when something you care about is at stake. And this person, Kelly McGonigal, she's a psychologist that specializes in studying the stress response and understanding how best to deal with it. And I like this definition because it says, I'm noticing something is important, something I care about is at stake, and perhaps I need to choose a course of action that's more wisely. And that's where those two hormones, the oxytocin and the DHEA, come into play. When we're under stress, not only does the body release the adrenaline, the epinephrine, and the cortisol, but also oxytocin, which is the cuddle hormone, prompts us to reach out and seek connection and support from other people. And DHEA actually primes our brains for learning, for trying new things. So let's zero in specifically on the digestive system when it's under stress. And what do we know about that? I think you'll all agree that when we're under stress, it changes the way we eat and the foods we choose. So some people, when they're under stress, they tend to eat more. Other people tend to eat less. I'm in that second category. And we also tend to choose foods. I doubt that you're going to go and grab that bag of carrot sticks when you're under stress. You're more apt to go to the freezer and reach for the Ben and Jerry's. So we eat foods that are higher in fat and have a really good mouthfeel to them. Those are the comfort foods. And some of this is the result of the fact that our body feels that it's under stress and may actually need more calories to deal with it. So to deal with the perceived threat. When we're stressed, our digestive system slows way down. It's considered non-essential in preserving our life in that moment. And if you've ever noticed, if you're feeling stressed, that's the time when you're likely to get indigestion, bloating, perhaps constipation. The effects of cortisol, one of those three major stress hormones, is very significant when it comes to digestion. Cortisol, which tends to stay in the body a lot longer than the adrenaline or the epinephrine, is the hormone that's responsible for encouraging our bodies to store more of what we take in as fat. And not just storing it as fat, but to store it right in the midsection of the body, which we know at this point is kind of a red flag when it comes to developing heart disease. So our bodies want to store these foods as fat because historically, going back to our ancestors, we were hunter-gatherers and we didn't always have ready access to food. So the message to our brain was, maybe I better store this as fat because I might need it at some point in the future. When we're under stress, we don't tend to sleep well. And that adds another dimension to the disruption of our digestive system. When we have a sleep deprivation, two chemicals that are produced in the gut, leptin and ghrelin, those are the hunger and satiety hormones, get disrupted. When we are deprived of sleep, our body produces more ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone. So if you're not sleeping and you're getting up and you're going to the kitchen, you're probably going to be looking for something to eat because that ghrelin has increased and you want to seek some food. When we don't sleep, we also make poor choices about what we eat and the size of our portions. And one last thing that might be a new concept to a lot of you is the relationship between eating at night and something called the MMC, or the migratory motor complex. You've all experienced this. On an empty stomach, you may get those, what we call the grumbellies. Well, that system, that MMC, is very important to clearing out your digestive system in preventing foods from building up in your gut. And the only way we get that MMC to kick in is to allow the body to be empty of food for at least 4 hours. Very important to cleansing our system. So when we look at stress, when we look at its effect on digestion, perhaps we can begin to adopt a more workable approach to how to manage the stress-food connection. Address the underlying conditions. What is it, perhaps, that's causing you to feel stressed? Are you not getting enough connection with other people? Are you not getting a good night's sleep? Are you not getting enough exercise? Are you rushing your meals? Are you feeling the pressure? Well, it's noon. I should be eating lunch, although I have a dozen things to do. Maybe that's not the wisest course of action. Consider the timing of meal. I know there's been a lot of articles recently about a practice known as intermittent fasting. Well, just by looking at my own life and the way I eat my meals, if, say, dinner is around 6 o'clock in the evening, and then I'm not eating again until 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, I've had an intermittent fast. Okay, so I'm not getting up and nibbling or, drinking this or drinking that. I'm basically fasting for around 12 hours. That allows that MMC to do its work. And also the practice of mindful eating. Another interesting little side note that I like to talk about because I teach yoga. There's been research done on why people gain weight over the age of 40 and how to perhaps limit that a little bit. Well, we know our metabolisms slow down a little bit over the age of 40. But what was found was that people who do yoga on a regular basis are less apt to fall prey to that over 40 weight gain. And it really has very little to do with the amount of calories you burn when you're doing yoga. It has more to do with a greater awareness of your body and how your body feels and what your body needs. So let's just pause for a moment here. There's been a lot of information covered before we get into the next part, which is mindfulness and the relationship of mindfulness to managing stress eating. So I invite you to open up your mics. And if you have any questions or comments about what we've talked about so far, feel free to jump in. Feel free to unmute your mics.
I'll start.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm aware of stress. First of all, I didn't realize how stressful the pandemic time was until I got my second shot. And all of a sudden, I just felt so so light. But on a daily basis, I don't think I'm aware of all the stress that I'm sort of holding in.
Yeah, it's
Now,
hard
there
to
are
do.
some times, I had to do taxes. Yeah, okay. I was like, oh, brother, okay. And stuff like that. So there are certain times, but in general, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, I understand, Mary Ellen. And, unfortunately, in the world that we live in, that is chronic low stress. It's sort of like static on a radio. It's there all the time. And
Yeah.
we kind of get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Maybe.
we don't notice it. You also might be more skilled at dealing with stress than you think.
Maybe.
So it could be a lot of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that you noticed that something felt different once you got that second shot, I agree with you. I had that same feeling of just relief.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was almost a tearful experience. I was grateful and I was relieved. Now,
Yeah.
has it changed a lot about what I'm doing and, racing? No, it hasn't done that. But there's a sense that a part of the threat is removed. And remember, we talked about the body has to determine, the mind has to determine that the threat has resolved. And once we have that, then we have that feeling of the parasympathetic nervous system with the rest and digest. But thank you for sharing that. I think that's an interesting, very interesting point. Anybody else want to comment on all of that information we talked about, and perhaps any of your own experiences with stress and eating?
Judy. Oh,
Yes.
Smyrna.
Hi,
It's
Myrna.
Myrna. Did I I don't I don't I don't have a regular time for when I eat. Like in the morning, I'm not hungry, or I'm going to exercise, so I wait. So I don't have regular times that I sit down actually to eat. Now, is that should I set myself actual times, schedule times that I should be eating on a regular basis? Because I could eat breakfast and then I'm not hungry until later in the day. And maybe at 8 o'clock, I'll make myself dinner, which probably isn't the healthiest time to eat. So I don't know if that's detrimental to my system, or should I be eating on a regular basis?
That is such a rich question, Myrna. And I'm going to share with you what I know about from what science tells us, but I'm also going to weigh in on that on a personal level and what I've experienced for myself and what I've experienced with people I've worked with as a nurse. We are all very, very individual in terms of how we eat, how we sleep, how we move, what works for us, what doesn't work for us. The recommendation generally is that we should eat something for breakfast. Okay. And that's mainly to get the digestive system moving. Okay. How much you eat, it doesn't have to be a lot, maybe a little juice, maybe a little cereal, maybe an egg. I know other people who don't eat breakfast, then 10 o'clock in the morning, they're ravenous. The problem with keeping the blood sugar fairly stable, we don't want to have such a degree of hunger that we're mindlessly eating. I don't know whether you've ever been in a situation where you weren't able to get a meal and you were really hungry, and then when you had the opportunity to eat, everything looked good. Right? So to manage that, but if your body is telling you that your weight is staying stable, your blood work is good when you go to the doctor, your cholesterol, your blood sugar, those kinds of things are all good, And it sounds like you are very in tune with your body signals. Am I
Mhm.
correct?
Yes.
Okay. So not only are you choosing a time to eat, but you're also mindfully choosing what it is you want to eat.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm very careful as to what I eat. I
Yeah.
try to be.
Yeah. Even just something that we eat to get satisfied in a lot of ways, and not just with our blood sugar. There's a definite emotional component to eating. So people whose weight tended to stay stable thought a bit about what they wanted to eat before they ate it. So in other words, they didn't eat something crunchy when they wanted something creamy. They didn't eat something hot when they wanted something cold. So the food that they did eat was much more satisfying, and they tended to eat a more reasonable amount.
Mhm.
One of the things I notice about myself is, particularly as I've gotten older, is I do eat, and I eat really well. I always eat breakfast. But I find myself gravitating basically to 2 meals a day and a snack. So in other words, I'll eat breakfast. I might have a couple of pieces of pita with hummus on it for lunch, and then dinner. Or
Mhm.
if we go out and have a big lunch, I'm not hungry at dinner.
Right. Right.
So I gravitate toward that. I'm paying attention to my body signals. What do I really want to eat, rather than relying on the clock?
Mhm.
I would not rely on the clock to tell you when to eat. I know a lot
Okay.
of people say it's noontime, so therefore I need to have a sandwich. No. Are you hungry? No, don't eat.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yes, it is.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Trust yourself, Myrna. Anybody else? All right, let's move along. So we've said that mindfulness, the kind of mindfulness that comes with getting in touch with your body, understanding how your body works and understanding your feelings, those kinds of things. So mindfulness, as it's defined by John Kabat-Zinn, who is one of the doctors who developed a program known as Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction out of UMass Medical Center. He and Saki Santarelli developed this program primarily to help people who were dealing with chronic pain. And there was a yoga component, there was a meditation component, there were various exercises that they did. And one of the focuses was developing mindfulness. So Kabat-Zinn defines mindfulness in this way. He says, it's paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the moment, non-judgmentally, with kindness and curiosity. So let's break that down and take a look. So when we say on purpose, there are times when we've been mindful in our life, when we're really engrossed in what we're doing, and the mindfulness may happen just spontaneously. But with mindfulness practices, we're actually deliberately inviting ourselves to be more aware, to be more conscious, to be more present. And mindfulness occurs in the moment. It doesn't occur in the past. It doesn't occur in the future. It happens right here, right now, in this very moment. Non-judgmentally, with kindness and curiosity. We are so good at beating ourselves up. So when we notice something, feelings that are arising, emotions or thoughts, to just notice them rather than judging them. And by the way, science tells us that we're actually paying attention slightly less than half the time, about 47%. And the time when we are least mindful, and this is scary, is when we're driving a car. How about that? So mindfulness is an important skill to build and develop. And when it comes to what we're eating, mindfulness can certainly help us develop better choices in what and how we eat. So, any additional comments before we do our conscious eating exercise? All right. Okay. So make sure you have your piece of food. I have my little raisin here. And I invite you to get comfortable in your seat, or wherever you are, allowing your feet to be flat on the floor. If you're wearing glasses, you can feel free to remove them, because all you need to do is listen. And just sit for a minute and tune into your breath. You don't have to change anything about the way you're breathing. Just connect with the sense of the breath coming in and the breath going out. Mindfulness is about being present in the moment, and the breath is happening in the moment. So, looking down at your piece of food, I have it cradled in my hand. I'm just going to take in this piece of food with my gaze. I'm going to look at the surface, the color, the texture. Maybe I can even feel the texture of the food against the skin of my palm. So just whatever there is to notice, notice that. And if you like, you can take your piece of food and draw it a little closer to your nose, and maybe there's a slight fragrance to the food. Now, taking your piece of food, place it in your mouth. Don't chew and don't swallow. Just place the food in your mouth. You may find yourself exploring it with your tongue. Rolling it around inside your mouth. And then biting down on this piece of food. Notice what happens and begin to chew. Try not to swallow if you can. And just chew and chew. See if you can chew that piece of food until it becomes almost liquid. And then when you can no longer contain what's in your mouth, let yourself swallow. And envisioning what's happening to the food as it travels down your throat, into your stomach. And imagining that over time, over the next few hours, that food will become part of who you are, the building blocks of your body. And perhaps pausing a minute now at the end and just allowing yourself to feel grateful that we have food to eat. Perhaps imagining the work that was needed to bring that food to you. The work of nature, the work of human hands, all of that to bring you this little piece of food. Take a few more nice deep breaths. All right. And coming back into yourself, putting this exercise aside, I'm going to invite you again to unmute yourself. So perhaps you can share a little bit about what that experience was like for you and maybe what awarenesses you had practicing. Feel free to unmute yourself.
I'll say it's I'll say it's amazing how much flavor there was in a raisin and a dried cranberry.
I hear you, Holly. You know, for some people who have done this exercise for the first time say, I never knew a raisin tasted like that. What else did you notice?
I also had a raisin and I didn't realize it was so juicy. I thought it would almost be crumbly.
So let's talk a little bit about what actually happened when you put the raisin in your mouth. What did you notice?
As you started chewing, you immediately got a lot of flavor.
And why was that, Mary Ellen? What happened in your mouth? What did your
I'm
body
sure it's
do?
your salivary glands, giving you a little liquid. And as you munched on the raisin, it like I said, it was almost juicy. I had to swallow several times before you mentioned, okay, swallow.
It's like an explosion of flavor with that little bitty raisin. It's really incredible. But I wanted to point out to you, if you remember your high school science, when it talked about the digestive system, what do we know about a raisin is a carbohydrate, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And where does the digestion of carbohydrates begin? In the
mouth?
In the mouth, right, with saliva. So good point to remember. If you're eating too fast, if you're not chewing your food properly, are you giving the body the benefit of that first stage of digestion? Probably not.
Oh, good point.
So that mixing, and these are things that we know, but we just don't always remember. So it's really a good reminder of how we need all of those stages. And it's a problem, like people who have lost a lot of teeth or have ill-fitting dentures can be very subject to indigestion because they're not getting the proper mastication, proper chewing of their food. Any other things you noticed about that exercise?
Oh, Julie, it's Myrna. I noticed I really slowed myself down. I tend to eat very generally. I live by myself, so I have no one to slow me down other than myself. So I found that I really slowed myself down and really was able to say, I was eating a pear and it happened to be very ripe and it was so sweet that I really found myself thoroughly enjoying it instead of just eating it to have something to eat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what this is all about. Conscious eating is not about deprivation. It's about savoring what it is that we have to eat. And that's why I love it so much. And when your food is satisfying to you, Myrna, we tend to eat less, not more. It's that emotional, the mouthfeel. You had the beautiful description of that mouthfeel with that super ripe pear. And you probably had a little fragrance from the pear as well when you smelled it, which is so delightful. So it's all about jumping into the sensations and really getting all the good we can from the food we eat, emotionally as well as physically. And what did we do before we actually started eating? Holly, you look like you're ready to say something. When we started the activity, what was the first direction I gave? To sit.
To sit quietly. Oh,
just to sit and take a few conscious breaths. The power of just a few conscious breaths to start to slow us down and make us more mindful is incredibly powerful. And we don't always give the credit. It seems too good to be true, too simple to be true, but it's not. Just taking those breaths starts to trigger the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest. So by calming down prior to eating, even if it's just this short experience, you're giving your digestive system full permission to do its best work. Any other observations? You think you might be inclined to try this again?
Yeah.
And share this exercise with other people. Now, obviously, conscious eating, if we spent all of our meals eating this way, we wouldn't do anything other than eat all day because it would take too long. But what we're going to talk about is ways you can incorporate some of the parts of this experience in your everyday eating behavior. So, number one, notice how you feel. Ask yourself, what am I hungry for? And remember to look at those red flags of when we are substituting food for something else, whether it's something, maybe we just are thirsty and we want to drink a little water, or maybe we're feeling anxious and we would better serve our bodies by taking a little walk or connecting with a friend on the phone. Hara-hachi-bu, I've talked about this before, and it's a great practice. It comes from Okinawa, and Okinawa is one of the blue zones that Dan Buettner identified in his book. People that have a large percentage of the population living to be 100 years old or older. And he was looking at what did these cultures do that helped them achieve this longevity. And the practice in Okinawa is called Hara-hachi-bu. And what this translates to is eating until you are 80% full. A lot of times in this country, we'll say, I'm full, I can't eat anymore. In Okinawa, they might be more inclined to say, I am no longer hungry. And there's a big difference in how that feels in our bodies when we say that. I am no longer hungry, as opposed to, oh, I'm full, that post-Thanksgiving feeling.
Yes.
Yeah. So very, very important. And one of the ways we achieve that satiety is to take our time. It takes 20 minutes, a full 20 minutes from the first bite of food at any meal to raise your blood sugar high enough that the hunger center in the brain shuts off. The average American will consume a meal in anywhere from 13 to 17 minutes. I don't know who gets paid to do these research studies, but that's what they came up with. So bottom line, if you're finishing your meal in less than 20 minutes, you're probably eating more than you need to, because your body still thinks you're hungry. So some tips to slow down: put your fork down between bites. Don't be holding your fork all the time. Slow it down. Take those conscious breaths before you start eating. I joke around and I say, I like to use chopsticks. It slows me way down, particularly when I'm eating soup. But yeah, I do like to use chopsticks for regular meals as well as just Chinese or Asian meals. And it does tend to slow you down and increase the enjoyment of the food. And then lastly, have a conscious meal, and let that conscious meal start when you're shopping for your groceries. Don't go to the grocery store when you're hungry. You're probably you're going to buy much more and different foods than you would if you weren't hungry. Did somebody agree with that?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Very, very important. So when you have a conscious meal, and I like to suggest breakfast as a conscious meal, because generally speaking, it's a pretty simple meal. It doesn't require a lot of preparation, doesn't require a lot of cleanup. So during a conscious meal, you don't eat, or you don't talk, you don't watch the television, you're not reading the news, you're just focusing on the preparation, the eating, and the cleanup after the meal. So maybe just once a week or once every other week, just set for yourself the intention of having a conscious meal. So there's some suggestions for you. And again, I'll open up to any remaining questions or comments, things you might want to apply in your own life. And the dance floor is open, so feel free. Joanne,
Well, I just thought it was good information, good, simple information. And I'll take it in. I'll give it a try.
It's one of those things, we don't think about eating in this way. And we don't think about the relationship between how stressors affect how we eat and what we eat. So I think it's important to think about that. How'd you like that statistic about the weight gain during COVID?
Scary.
30 pounds average for Americans.
Yikes.
So yeah, a lot of that I think is comfort. Joanne, this was the second time you've taken this program, correct?
Yes.
And
go ahead.
No, you.
I'm still struggling with the same thing. And I think it was Myrna who mentioned it. When you live alone, it's really hard to slow down at mealtime. And my way of slowing down is to do what you say we shouldn't do, which is to, you know, thumb through a magazine, look at my phone, watch the news, whatever. And, you know, the food is gone before you know it when you do that. But I've tried it the other way in sort of silence by myself, and the food still goes pretty quickly. So I've got to figure out what to do there.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, in terms of having the conscious meal, the mindful meal, you know, just once in a while is a good practice. It's a good meditation, mindfulness practice. I know some people who live alone that one of their practices is when they eat, they set the table, and they live alone. They set the table for themselves as if they were setting the table for a guest, with a nice napkin, nice dishes. You know, they use their good glasses. So it kind of reminds them that the food is special and they are special. And they've reported that it helps to slow the process down.
I'll have to try that because, you know, I microwave a lot of things, you know, that I've cooked in advance, and I find myself sometimes eating them right out of the same bowl that I've microwaved them in. You know, it saves the dish. But probably if I did have a place setting and put the food down on the plate, it would seem like a much nicer experience.
Yeah, there's no reason why you can't make it a kind of mini event in the day, rather than just something to provide fuel to keep you going.
Okay, I'll give that a try.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody else? What about the harahachi bu? Was that an aha moment for some people?
If you have a problem with portion control, that's a good way to start thinking about that.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, one of the other things that I remember when we did a diabetes program, they recommend a divided plate, or just, you know, envisioning the dividers on the plate so that you're getting the right amount. And when I say a plate, you know, if you look at some of the plates that people have in their house, they're huge. So when they're talking about dividing your plate, they're talking about a 9-inch diameter plate, which is roughly the size of a paper plate, a disposable paper plate that you would buy. Not one of these ginormous plates that you get in a restaurant or whatever. 9-inch diameter plate. It's a lot less food that you put on there.
I also believe one of my main problems is portion control. And I think taking that whole idea of giving yourself a small portion, purposely a small portion, and knowing that if you're hungry, you can have more. But in between, while you're eating, you're going to take that thought process and say, I'm not hungry anymore, or I am hungry. So just the idea of breaking those portions up,
right,
might help me.
So if you wait, Mary Ellen, those 20 minutes, and your body is saying to you, I am still hungry, then that's a whole different story. Right.
Yeah. Good point.
Oh, Judy, I had read somewhere that it was suggested you have 2 glasses of water before you start eating.
I've read that too. There's various thoughts. I'm a water drinker, Myrna. I'm drinking water all day long, and with meals and such. Although at dinner I have a glass of wine, which I really enjoy. I think that was in one of the articles that I sent about the backup articles, there was a little bit about drinking wine, but 2 glasses of water might fill you up a little bit too much. It might give you a false sense. I think that was recommended for people who really have a problem with overeating. And sometimes we do confuse the signals in our body, hunger and thirst. So by drinking a glass of water, maybe not a big one, maybe a few minutes before you eat, it could help. But drinking 2 big glasses of water before meals, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not sure about that.
What do you suggest about to do about like cravings that you may have? I usually have like a sweet craving later on in the evening. And I try to have something like something naturally sweet. So is that, oh
yeah, think about what you just said, late at night. And what did we talk about with as you get tired, sometimes food is a substitute for sleep.
Oh.
So your body might be reaching out to you to find ways to stay awake. In other words, if you take in a little bit of sugar, it might boost your energy temporarily. So your body is trying to maybe tell you that you need to rest. And I don't have a sweet tooth, but I do like a little piece of dark chocolate. And I find that, okay, cravings in general are a very interesting phenomenon. Sometimes they're physiologically based. Sometimes it's because our body isn't getting enough of a certain nutrient, so we crave those foods. Other times it's psychological. Other times it's like a reward we give ourselves. I've been good all day, so I'm going to have, a box of cookies after dinner. But again, with choosing the foods that are satisfying to you, not only physically, but emotionally. I mean, you can eat all the carrot sticks in the world. If you want a hot fudge sundae, you're still going to want a hot fudge sundae, correct?
Yes.
All right. So my approach to that, and this works for me when I have a craving, and I do like a hot fudge sundae once in a while, I eat it with a happy heart, and I probably don't crave it again for another 2 or 3 or 4 months.
How do you not feel guilty about it?
I don't.
You don't.
And here's an interesting thing. We talked about the effects of cortisol. Now, cortisol is a stress hormone, correct? One of the most interesting presentations I saw on nutrition was from a dietitian who talked about when you are under stress, because your body is secreting cortisol, we know that the body will store more of those calories as fat. Okay, we said that in the program, and fat in the midsection. So conversely, if you are eating what you're eating with a happy, grateful heart, not under stress, it's not going to have the same negative effect on you that it would if you were stressed. How about that?
That's a positive spin on it.
Well, it's science, it's cortisol. So I eat that hot fudge sundae with a very happy heart, and then don't want another one for goodness knows how long.
Okay.
Now I have to be careful with potato chips. So I crave the salty things. So I tend to limit the amount of those that come into the house.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, queries, quotes, quibbles, quandaries?
No, I'm just going to try again. It's my second time seeing it, and I took a page of notes again because I find if I write things down, they sort of get better in my mind better. So there's a few things that I forgot from before that I said I was going to remember that I'm going to work on. I'm lucky I wasn't one that gained 30 pounds.
And you can always reach out to me, Nancy, if there's something that you said, well, you said this, what was that you said about that? You can always reach out to me, pick up the phone, call me, or send me an email, and I'll be happy to respond.
Oh, that's great. Thanks.
All right, everybody. Have a
Good.
lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Bye.
See y'all soon.
Thank you.
Okay,
Stay well, eat healthy.
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.